Hello everybody and welcome back to RP-1. In the last episode, well, technically the last episode was a live stream, we had been working on the Advanced Biological Experiment capsule return mission, and that actually is one of our last missions for the suborbital research program. As we see here, we got one left here, and we are reaching the pinnacle of our contract where we will start losing more money. However, that is fine. It won't take us very long to complete that. And under Early Heavy Satellites program, we have yet to do anything. We just picked up this program in the last actual episode. So in the live stream, we worked on getting that started. We do have some leaders here that we can appoint. However, most of them are either flight research for X-planes or solid rocket boosters, which we're not currently using. So I am going to wait until we get that science satellite up into orbit to see who the last leader is and whether or not they'll be helpful. So the contract we're going to work on first is that biological experiment rocket. So we're actually just going to take this film return rocket and repurpose that. So we're going to take those off and then put on the biological experiment, which is much smaller. I could switch my avionics to fit, but we also do need some sounding payload on this, and 200 units exactly. So we're going to put that on there. We probably could have made it a little bit smaller, but we are going to be using these SRBs, so I figured give it a little bit of placement, a little bit of aerodynamics if we can. Get a smaller parachute size so the SRBs don't burn them up, but we actually will fix that and move the parachute up. We are going to be using a science core for this top stage because we don't need it to have all that power. We don't need it to weigh all that much. We don't need the near Earth core to have to carry that much heavy load. So we are going to split the two avionics into that. However, we don't technically need to. We could have left them as near Earth and been fine. So you see here I get a little bit better size for our sounding payload containment. We're going to put our SRBs on, put them up a little higher and angled out a little bit more so we don't run the risk of burning up our payload. I do want to thank a helpful commenter on Reddit who pointed out, not necessarily to me, but something that I learned, which was very helpful, that you can actually transfer your science from the capsule into the avionics. And so that is something that we're going to start utilizing from here on out, because the amount of times that our experiments burn up but our avionics don't means that we could possibly have a few more successes that way. I'm going to rename the rocket the Advanced Biological Experiment because it's nice to keep things organized, and I like having decals on the rockets. So all in all, this is essentially it. I'm taking a look at our engines. We do have the ability of upgrading once we get the basic rocketry node. However, that's going to take so long that I just don't feel like trying to wait for it. So instead, we're just going to go with the oh shoot, what was that? Was that the Veronique? I think it might be the A9 actually that I'm using for this lifting engine. However, soon we are going to be moving on to bigger and better things later in this episode. In this episode, we are doing a lot of building. However, there will be a few launches. The launches of the Advanced Biological Experiment will be happening at the end of this episode, and a test flight of our heavy satellite orbital rocketry. As you can see here, I'm just showing you a little bit of the concept of the goal of this thing is once we hit a retrograde to fire and slow ourselves down as much as possible, but it is not the easiest task, not the most accurate, and because of the fact that we're not using near-Earth avionics, we don't actually have any real control over this. But as you can see here, it slows it down enough that we can come through the atmosphere without fear, and we can actually keep that capsule from overheating, which is always nice. So now I'm just going to change around a few of the colors on this stuff, and we're just going to finalize the design before putting it out and getting ready. So I also want to make sure that I'm using the most accurate tanks. We don't have access to isogrid tanks just yet, and it will be a while before we can. So unfortunately, we're using the most advanced of the aluminum tanks for right now. Stringer tanks, actually, I believe. But soon we'll be moving on to the isogrid tanks to save some weight, so that'll be nice. So now we've got that. Unfortunately, I can't actually have both these contracts active at the same time, which doesn't make any sense to me, but we come in here for the first of the downrange milestones to look at what we'll need, and specifically what kind of sounding payload we're going to need. Until we take that contract, we're not going to be able to actually track it in the simulation phase, so we are just going to eyeball the results. And this is enough for the downrange 6000 contract, and so the goal is that if we can actually bring this particular craft into orbit with that, then we can feel pretty confident about our ability to handle the optional contracts. And we may actually need to do some of those optional contracts. When we went to pick up the Heavy Satellites program the last time, we found out that we did not have enough reputation to take it at a fast rate, which was what we wanted to do for the Heavy Satellites program. So we are actually, we did good keeping ourselves ahead of schedule and being very fast with our stuff, but in doing so, we haven't had enough launches to make the public really feel comfortable about giving us money into our space program. So now I'm looking for the RD-105, which is my typical go-to Heavy Satellites orbiting engine, and I'm not finding it, which is kind of throwing me off. I'm only really used to orbiting with the RD-105 comfortably. So as I see here, it's not even in the node that we're unlocking now. It's the following one with a whopping 10 points of research required. And I just can't afford to cancel any of the other research that I have, so we are not going to be able to use that RD-105 for this first launch. I go ahead and put 2 of those advanced biological rockets into production, so those will be ready. I'm putting in 2 for a little bit of redundancy, so if one has a problem, we have another one on the way. So I'm not sure what engine I'm going to use, if not the RD-105. So what I'm doing here is I'm just separating any of the engines that don't include the words required ground clamps, because those are the engines that I can use mid-flight. And so here are kind of my options that I have. I spent some time, I cut it out, but I spent some time looking at the stats of every single one of them, and the ones that I decided that we're going to go with are these gamma engines. And we are actually going to go with 4 of them because I do want a significant thrust to weight on this. I don't want it to be slow or incapable. So I am using the isogrid tanks on this, and that's because the Heavy Satellite will take the longest to produce, and by that time, hopefully, we will have access to that technology, because I just like isogrid so much more. There's probably some good advantages and disadvantages to each of the tanks, but I do like the fact that the isogrids weigh less. They are more expensive, but they, make your craft lighter in total, so I appreciate that. We are putting on a fairing to kind of keep everything neat and organized. We don't technically need this because the aerodynamics of the craft is fine enough, but I do like the look of how it came out all nice and neat. So we're gonna go and try to attach that there, and then change it to match the diameter. So this is also going to act as our decoupler as well, so I want to make sure that we have enough clearance to go. And of course we do want to make it a little more streamlined and aerodynamic, so we're going to make it more of a cone shape. There we go. Give it a little bit of length. Give the amount of fuel. It has 145 second burn time. The gamma engine, we are using 4 of them, but I mean they will be burning the same amount of time for all of them, but the amount of fuel that we need ends up being 4 times as much. So this is definitely going to be a heavy satellite. I feel like even without the exact sounding payload that we need for the first orbital contract, I feel like the satellite itself is going to be heavy enough to suffice, because you need to have 40 kilogram satellite in orbit. So that's why the same tactics for the light satellite program just won't work in the heavy satellite program, because you just need to get a much heavier payload up there. So now we are adding in a high pressure tank for our RCS. We're going to be using nitrous oxide in there, and some of these a little bit heavier duty RCS thrusters. So we switch them over to the nitrous oxide. We will be able to have that by the time this rocket is produced. We're going to shift the length of it down because we don't actually need much. And in this first launch, we actually don't need RCS at all. Like we basically keep on point to where we want to go when I do all this stuff. Even in the real missions, this RCS doesn't prove to be very helpful. In fact, it's just extra weight and unnecessary. However, it is a good habit to have in the heavy satellites program, in any of the satellites program actually, once you start getting into things, because RCS can make some very critical minor adjustments if need be. And it also, helps you point towards your target if you need. I don't know why I shifted those in just then. After reviewing the footage, I'm looking at it, I'm like, what was my reasoning for that? I didn't need to shift them in. They weren't in danger of, catching anything, but now they're clipping a little bit, and I don't like that. But I didn't notice it until reviewing the footage, so there's nothing we can do about it now. But maybe when we go and build this rocket out in the next episode for the next mission, we will fix that. So I look at over all my options, and I am a creature of habit, and I get stuck with my RD-108. So we're just going to go ahead and build this lifter how I normally do, with the 2 separate tanks, one being a hollow cylinder that allows, or a hollow cone, excuse me, that allows me to kind of build this a little bit like a fairing, except that it includes the fuel, so it is still being utilized, but it still also kind of hides some of the piping of the engine. Keeps everything looking nice and neat, nice and clean. And there we have it. I'm gonna adjust the lengths a little bit to give it a little bit more aerodynamics eventually, but we got our fuel type in there. It's all set to go. We have a burn time of 220 seconds on the RD-108, which I love. I love a long burn time. It just gives you a lot more control. Yeah, so we're going to extend it out. Unfortunately, the full burn of the RD-108 ends up making it too heavy, and thrust to weight ratio is pretty abysmal, can't lift off the ground. So we add in 2 RD-107 side tanks. We just replicate the design of the first center tank, throw on more fuel, turned into a nose cone, and of course replace the engines. This launch vehicle is almost done. All we need to do is get the right fuel in it, and as you see here, we don't have it in the right stage, but that's okay because that allows us to fine-tune our burn time, because this only has a burn the RD-107 only has a burn time of 170 seconds, not the 220, which is good because it makes for better side boosters, because they can burn out sooner. We don't have access to Kerbal Space Program's fuel ducts here, so no asparagus staging for us. So it's important to make sure that your timing is always being considered. So now we've got 130. We're going to burn it over a little bit. Our RD-108 108 is being overburnt quite significantly, but we will adjust that later. Get our staging all correct. I want the RCS to come on before we separate, so that way we can have control when we go. I am going to use some ullage motors. You know, technically we do have the RCS, so as I mentioned, we don't end up using it as much, and that's because we have those ullage motors. But in the future, we could probably get rid of those ullage motors, use the RCS to keep ourselves moving forward, pushing our fuel to the back of our tank, which makes it light. I mention ullage a lot sometimes, and sometimes I have to remember that not everyone is familiar with RSS and realism overhaul terms and real life rocket science. But whenever I mention ullage, basically what that means is that the fuel is free floating in the tank, therefore it is just anywhere in the tank and not necessarily towards the back of the tank where the engines are, where it needs to ignite. So in order to ignite your fuel in a 0G gravity, you want to push your rocket forward, so that way the fuel hits the back of the tank and sits where the engine is. So as you see here, we are adjusting the amount of fuel. I underburned a little bit and came up short on my goal, so now I'm just, solving the problem by throwing more fuel into it, but then you end up running into the tyranny of the rocket equation, which is essentially the heavier your craft, the more fuel it takes to lift it, but the more fuel you have, the heavier your craft becomes, which means you need more fuel to lift it, so on and so forth. But let's go ahead and take a quick aside into this simulation, because this was kind of funny. This is exactly what I mean. As you see, we have a thrust to weight of over 1, but this rocket is not going to space today. Not going to space anytime. So that is why adjusting, overburning your engines can be helpful. Sometimes you get a little extra performance out of it, but you gotta weigh your options, because it's not worth it if your rocket can't lift the ground. So went ahead and did another test flight. I do want to adjust the fuel as well, make sure that I have enough. And as we see here, our center stage was actually burning for 368 seconds as opposed to the 220 that it's rated for, and so therefore we needed to adjust that considerably. I wasn't paying attention to the numbers well enough when we put the things together, and so that's why I kept adding on fuel, thinking like, oh, I have enough, I can safely burn this much, but we could not. So I adjusted it to be the correct size, and this ended up proving to be a much better test. So just gonna give it a little extra fuel just to have a little more safety margin on our orbit, but all in all, this is actually pretty good. We are going to be launching this rocket in the next episode, because we just don't have the ability to create the launch pad and all the pieces necessary for it just yet, so it will take some time. I decided at the last minute that extra boosters will just be ideal. This will not only help us get into orbit this time, but it will keep us in the right placement to upgrade this rocket with better engines and get better performance out of it when we need more advanced satellites, heavier satellites going up. So we are playing around with the control on the near Earth avionics just to make sure that we can control everything, making minor adjustments here and there, but overall we are going to be getting ready to color it soon. Make sure our avionics are set correctly. And it's a bit of a back and forth with this, trying to get the avionics right, because sometimes you type in 0.5 and then it just backs you up, and so you have to control more than the amount. And as you see here, we just give up at 274. But we're going to go ahead and do the test flight of this rocket, because we spent so much time working on the design of it, and this has basically just been a build episode. Like I mentioned, we do have 2 more flights, 2 real flights, not simulations, but we spent so much time working on this heavy satellites rocket, and I didn't get the chance to. I was hoping to work on it during our live stream, but I didn't get the chance to work on it, so I decided, let's just include the launch of this. This is, once again, just a simulation, but I do try to take my simulation seriously. The only difference between this and the real launch is that the real launch has failures, rocket failures, engine failures, things like that. So we have to plan for the worst, but expect the best. We're starting to pitch over. I'm using MacLeod's ascent guidance here, but I have it stop after separating the side boosters because there is some manual aspects that I want to handle with this. Primarily the coasting. I haven't been able to figure out MacLeod's coasting feature to allow it to just handle the entire orbit itself. It's just a matter of timing, I think. I think I just need to understand when the appropriate time to launch the next stage is, and then I just have to plan for it there. But it's hard to nail down that perfect number when launches can be slightly different. So I don't like the fact that our time to apoapsis is dropping, and it's already significantly below the burn time of our second engine, which is not good. So I'm manually tilting myself up to hopefully extend out that time to apoapsis a little more. Our apoapsis just passed into space. We are now reaching the Kármán line, and now we are at the 150 minimum perigee that we need for the contract. So now that we're above that and our time to apoapsis is closer, we would have about a minute and 30-second burn is around what we're supposed to do for our top stage, for our orbiting stage. So trying to keep that time to apoapsis well enough that I can actually make that burn was a little bit of a challenge, but nonetheless I eventually just give up, go horizontal and allow myself to separate, but I decide to just go ahead, point prograde, and set myself up for my burn now, wasting no time in the coasting phase. So it's not the ideal burn. Our time to apoapsis wasn't at the exact halfway point. However, we do have some significant thrust to weight, like I mentioned before, given the fact that we're using 4 of the Gamma engines. So I feel a lot more confident in its ability. But again, these are engines that are more basic than I've ever used in any kind of orbital heavy satellite rocket. So this is all new territory for me. This is the first simulation that I made since I did all of those adjustment features, and so if this can successfully make it into orbit, then we can feel pretty confident in this design, and we can move forward with it and hopefully just upgrade it as we need to go into the next technological era. Excuse me. One thing I'm excited about is that the body of this heavy satellite is the same. All I need to do once I get that RD-105 engine is I just need to pop it into place. But there we go. With the slight camera shift and our fuel running out, we now have an apoapsis of above 1.7 million meters and a periapsis of 192. We have the sounding payload necessary. We have every part of that mission handled, so this I feel is safe enough to go ahead and color. We can't put it into production just yet. We don't have a lot of the science necessary to build it. We don't have a launch complex ready for it, but one step at a time, we can still build our launch complex and get that started. So that way, in the next episode, we can just kind of get jumping on this mission and the missions moving forward. So hopefully, in the next episode, we can just fully focus on several heavy satellite launches, because I'm excited about that. Orbiting in RP-1 is such a great feeling. Next to what I've found so far is passing by the moon. That was great as well. So getting a human into orbit, getting a space station out, getting an actual moon landing, all of that seems to just increase in the amount of joy that you get in this version of KSP. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking I'm trying to do a little more research into stuff, a little more homework, because this is definitely a game where real world knowledge is beneficial. So hopefully we can achieve that with a little more grace. Throwing on some decals doesn't really matter, just some side bits to look nice. I think I'm at that stage in my RP-1 career where that's now that's now a concern. It's like, oh, what does my rocket look nice? It works, yes, but how does it look? I'm gonna put a decal right here on top. I liked how it just centered up like that. That's nice. But we have everything set. We do need to make sure that our communication is turned down. We don't need nearly that much power on our antennas, and it doesn't make too much of a difference on the weight of it, but I'm sure, you know, the cost, the time, all of that matters. We are going to throw some experiments on here. I don't think we need the barometer or the thermometer, and probably not the telemetry data as well, but we're going to keep that on there just to keep an eye on it. But the mass spectrometer is primarily what we need. Let's go ahead and build ourselves the launch complex. Then we're going to go back to the KSC and check out that our advanced biological experiment is ready. So let's go ahead and finish off this episode with some launches. So June 8th, 1955, we launch our first rocket. The engine sounds were a little scratchy and quite annoying, so I decided to get rid of them for these launches. As you see here, we're starting to fall back down. Our thrust to weight ratio is over 1, but we're slowly descending, and that is because our engine had some performance loss. Like I mentioned, those are the failures that we get sometimes, and so in order to possibly save the avionics and the experiment and some of the expensive parts of our rocket, I decided to just quickly stage and separate it from the rest of the craft so it didn't explode upon its falling. But we see that the body didn't explode, so that's nice. But all in all, that was a failed launch. That was through no fault except for the cruelty of the failing parts aspect of Realism Overhaul. So we are just going to put out that second rocket that we put into the queue, and I'm very thankful that we decide to work with the redundancy. It does save us a little bit of time, but we go ahead and put that second launch off just a few months later, so it's nice we don't waste too much time waiting. And we have a clean ignition, a clean separation. We are heading straight. We aren't using MacJeb's auto ascent guidance for this. We are actually just locked to our SAS control, and I'm just manually going to tilt it over. We don't need very many parameters for this. We need to get to 140 kilometers, and we need to go 200 kilometers downrange, which we know that this rocket can easily do. That's not a problem. It can go much higher than 140, and just with a little bit of downrange tilting, it can go much farther than the 200 kilometers. Our apoapsis is into space now, so we can just start pitching sideways to give ourselves some of that forward momentum. There's no need to spin stabilize, but I just do so for the fun of it. And then I go ahead and separate. So now all this needs to do is do its science, get across the distance of the Earth, and then come back down safely. So now as we look at our contract, we have all of our markers checked, except for that last one, the surface speed greater than 2200. I'm looking, I'm like, oh, my orbit speed is not. Oh, okay, so my surface speed as I come down will now become fast enough to solve that part of the contract. But now as I look, our altitude is not above 140, so we had to hit both those things at the same time of surface speed of 220 at an altitude greater than the Kármán line. So this launch was also a dud. I did not pay attention to that aspect, and I guess in my simulations I must have hit that just barely, and it satisfied it. But in this launch, I was not going fast enough at the right time, so yeah, we just didn't do it. But the SRBs fired off well enough and slowed us down through the heat so we didn't lose anything. We did get a little bit of science from this, so it's not a complete waste, but all in all, this is going to have to be a launch that we will have to do yet again. We'll probably start that off in the next episode, and then we're going to build our heavy satellite and keep going forward within the program. I'm very excited at the progress we've made. You know, we're only a couple episodes in, and we're already into the heavy satellites program. It's only 1955, so I feel like we're pretty on par with where we're going to go. We're not going to get 1956, 57 orbital until 1958, so that's not great, so we may have to add more scientists, but we will figure out all of that in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed making the live stream and talking with y'all and learning some things, so I really appreciate any feedback or any tips you guys have on RP-1. I will gladly hear them out in the comments. I love learning some new things and thanking y'all later. But anyways, that is where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more RP-1. If you did, think about subscribing. Drop me a like, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.